The Harrington family heirloom necklace had always been more than just jewelry. A delicate string of pearls with a sapphire pendant, elegant enough to be noticed, significant enough to carry our family's history. My grandmother wore it, my mother wore it, and my sister Elaine was destined to wear it too. I'm Claire Harrington, the younger sister, the rebel who chose art over law, travel over stability, and independence over family expectations. Elaine, 3 years my senior, was the model daughter. Straight A student, successful corporate lawyer, and now bride-to-be to James Whitmore, son of one of Boston's most influential families. Our mother had passed away 5 years ago after a brief battle with cancer, leaving the necklace to Elaine with specific instructions that it would be hers to wear when she married. I hadn't expected anything different. The firstborn daughter always received the necklace. I told myself I didn't mind. The Harrington-Whitmore wedding was set to be the social event of the season. 300 guests, a historic cathedral, reception at the Whitmore estate. I flew back from Berlin, where I'd been working on a photography exhibition, 2 weeks before the wedding. "Claire, you've changed your hair again," my father remarked when he picked me up from Logan International. His tone carried that familiar note of disapproval. My once blonde locks were now auburn, cut in an asymmetrical bob that felt right in European art circles, but clearly didn't meet Harrington standards. "Nice to see you too, Dad," I replied, forcing a smile. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd come home carrying a secret. A letter from my mother, delivered to me by her old friend Ruth just before I left for Europe. A letter I was instructed not to open until Elaine's wedding day approached. That night, as I unpacked in my childhood bedroom, I finally broke the seal on the envelope. The contents would shatter everything we thought we knew about our family, the necklace, and each other. Somehow, I had to decide what to do with this truth before Elaine walked down the aisle with our family's most treasured possession around her neck. The next morning, I watched through the window as the officiant, Reverend Maxwell, arrived for a planning meeting. He was new to our family's church, having replaced our longtime minister after his retirement. Something about the way he looked at our house, with recognition rather than admiration, sent a chill through me. Somehow, I sensed he was connected to the secrets my mother's letter had revealed, and with 3 days until the wedding, time was running out for decisions that would change our family forever. The Harrington family home stood as a testament to old Boston money, a colonial-style mansion in Beacon Hill, with imposing columns and meticulously maintained gardens. Inside, photographs chronicled a carefully curated family narrative. Father's law school graduation, mother's charity galas, Elaine's academic achievements. My contributions to the family gallery were notably fewer, a single framed news clipping about my photography exhibition in Paris. "There you are," Elaine said, finding me examining the family photographs. At 32, my sister remained effortlessly elegant. Honey blonde hair perfectly styled, not a wrinkle in her cream silk blouse. "We need to finalize the seating chart. Is everything okay, Elaine? You seem stressed." Something flickered across her face. Vulnerability, perhaps, before her practiced smile returned. Just wedding jitters, and Father's been impossible about the guest list. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I'd been close to as a child, before expectations and competition had driven us apart. As we worked on wedding details, Ruth Lancaster, my mother's closest friend and my godmother, arrived. At 65, Ruth remained striking. Silver hair in a sleek bob, bright red lipstick her signature. She'd been more present in my life than Elaine's, supporting my artistic pursuits when my parents had been skeptical. "Claire," she embraced me warmly. "You look wonderful. Europe agrees with you." "Ruth, I didn't know you were coming today," Elaine said, her tone cooling slightly. "Just dropping off a wedding gift," Ruth replied, handing Elaine a small package. "Your mother would be so proud to see you wearing the necklace." Elaine fingered the package nervously. "Actually, I haven't tried it on yet. Father has it in the safe." Ruth's eyes met mine briefly. "Well, perhaps Claire could help you with it tomorrow. Sisters should share such moments." Later that evening, I found myself alone with Reverend Maxwell in the garden. He was younger than I expected for a minister, perhaps early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond their years. "Miss Harrington," he acknowledged me. "Your father mentioned you've been abroad." "Berlin," I confirmed. "Photography work." He nodded thoughtfully. "I knew someone who lived in Berlin once. Catherine Mills. She was a photographer too. The name from my mother's letter." My heart stuttered. "Did you know her well?" "We were close," he said carefully. She taught me that sometimes truth is the greatest act of love, even when it hurts. Before I could respond, James Whitmore appeared. "Claire, there you are. Elaine's looking for you. Something about the necklace." As I excused myself, Reverend Maxwell caught my arm gently. "Truth has its own timeline, Claire, but when it emerges, it changes everything." That night, I discovered Elaine in our mother's old sitting room, silently weeping. In that moment, I realized there was more at stake than just a family heirloom or a long-buried secret. My sister, always strong, always perfect, was breaking. And whatever truth I was holding might be the final blow. The morning before the rehearsal dinner dawned bright and clear. I found my father in his study, methodically polishing the sapphire pendant of the Harrington necklace. "Your mother wore this when we married," he said without looking up. "She believed it brought luck to Harrington marriages." "Did it?" I asked, leaning against his desk. "Bring luck, I mean." He finally met my gaze. 35 years, Claire. Not perfect ones, but good enough. I swallowed hard. "Dad, can I ask you something about Mom? Did she ever mention someone named Catherine Mills?" The cloth dropped from his hand. "Where did you hear that name?" "It doesn't matter." "Did she?" His jaw tightened. "Your mother's life before me is irrelevant to this wedding. I'm giving this necklace to Elaine today, as tradition dictates." End of discussion. Later that morning, I encountered James in the kitchen, nursing a coffee. "Corporate law never sleeps?" I asked, pouring myself a cup. He offered a tired smile. "Merger that can't wait, even for weddings." "Are you happy, James? About marrying my sister?" He looked startled by my directness. "Of course. Elaine is exceptional." "That's not what I asked." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I care deeply for Elaine, but between us, I worry she's marrying the man her father approves of, not necessarily the man who makes her happiest." "Have you told her this?" "Tried to. Last night, actually. Suggested we postpone, take some time to be sure. She shut down completely." He rubbed his temples. "Then she mentioned the necklace, how important it was that she wear it, how it symbolized everything about becoming a true Harrington wife." Our conversation was interrupted by Elaine herself, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Claire, can we talk? Privately?" In my bedroom, Elaine paced nervously. "I found something in Mother's old jewelry box, a photograph I've never seen before." She handed me a faded Polaroid. 2 young women, arms around each other, standing on a beach. One was unmistakably our mother, perhaps 20 years old. The other was a striking woman with dark curly hair. "Turn it over," Elaine said quietly. On the back, in our mother's handwriting, "Catherine and me. Provincetown, 1982. The happiest summer." "Elaine, there's more." She pulled out a small, worn journal, her diary from that year. I started reading it and she trailed off, her composure cracking. "Claire, I don't think I can wear that necklace tomorrow." "Why not?" "Because everything we've been told about it is a lie." Her voice shook. "It wasn't passed down through generations of Harrington women. Catherine gave it to Mother. It was a promise between them." My mother's letter had hinted at this truth, but hearing Elaine confirm it made it real. "Does Dad know you found these?" "No, and he can't." Panic edged her voice. "The rehearsal dinner is in 5 hours. 300 people are arriving tomorrow." We can't." A knock at the door silenced us both. Ruth stood there, taking in our expressions and the items spread between us. "I see you found some answers," she said softly, "but not all of them." "You knew?" Elaine accused. "All these years?" "I was there when they met," Ruth admitted. "And I was there when your mother made the choice to leave Catherine and marry your father." "Why are you bringing this up now?" Elaine demanded. Ruth's gaze shifted to me. "Because your mother never intended for it to stay buried forever, and because Reverend Maxwell isn't just any minister." "What does he have to do with this?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "His full name is Michael Maxwell Mills," Ruth said quietly. "Catherine's son." The revelation hung in the air between us. Somewhere in the house, I could hear my father's voice as he greeted early arriving guests. The clock was ticking toward the rehearsal dinner, where we would all perform our roles in the carefully orchestrated Harrington Whitmore production. "He's here to expose us, isn't he?" Elaine whispered. "To ruin everything." "No," Ruth replied. "He's here because your mother asked him to be, in her final days." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, we heard the distinctive sound of my father opening the safe. He would be coming soon, bearing the necklace that had bound 2 women in love before it became a symbol of our family's public story. The question now was which truth would Elaine wear around her neck when she walked down the aisle. While Elaine retreated to prepare for the rehearsal dinner, I sought out James, finding him on the terrace overlooking the garden. "Your sister's been crying," he observed immediately. "What's happened?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Family history is complicated, Claire," James said, his professional demeanor slipping. "I need to know if I should be worried. Not as a Whitmore, but as someone who cares about Elaine." "Did you know that Elaine applied to art school before law school?" I asked. "She was accepted to RSD with a portfolio Dad never saw." James looked genuinely surprised. "She never mentioned it. Because she tore up the acceptance letter and enrolled at Harvard Law instead. To be the daughter Dad wanted." I turned to face him directly. "The Harrington family's specialty is sacrifice for appearance's sake. My sister has spent her entire life being what everyone else needed. The postponement conversation wasn't about you," I confirmed. "It's about her finding herself before she becomes someone's wife." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret Whitmore, James's mother. Unlike the cold socialite I'd imagined, Margaret had warm eyes and an artist's observant gaze. "You must be Claire," she said, extending her hand. "Your work at the Kunsthalle was remarkable." "James mentioned you've been discussing art with Elaine," she continued. "Did you know she's quite talented herself? She showed me some sketches when they first started dating." James looked stunned. "She's never drawn anything around me." Margaret smiled sadly. "Women of our circle often hide the parts of themselves that don't fit expected roles. I gave up sculpting when I married into the Whitmore name. My biggest regret." Meanwhile, across the lawn, my father was enthusiastically introducing Elaine to Judge Harrison, his mentor and friend. She smiled and nodded appropriately, the perfect Harrington daughter, while clutching her champagne glass with white knuckles. I made my way to Ruth and Reverend Maxwell, determined to understand the full picture. "You're more than just Catherine's son, aren't you?" I asked Maxwell directly. "Catherine Mills is my mother, but your mother, Elizabeth, was my godmother. They maintained a friendship after their relationship ended, though your father never knew." "And my mother asked you specifically to officiate this wedding?" I pressed. "Her last request," he confirmed, though she didn't specify what truths should be revealed, only that I should follow my conscience when the time came. In the midst of the dinner, I noticed my father slip away to his study. Following discreetly, I found him staring at an old photograph, not of my mother, but of his own parents at their wedding. "My mother hated this necklace," he said without turning around. "Called it her beautiful prison. I never understood until tonight." "You know about Catherine," I realized. "I've always known," he admitted quietly. "Elizabeth told me before we married. I chose to believe the necklace's history was irrelevant to our future. This revelation stunned me. My father, rigid, traditional, unyielding, had known and married my mother anyway. Why did you insist Elaine wear it then?" His shoulders sagged. "Because acknowledging its true origin meant acknowledging that your mother settled for me. That perhaps our entire marriage was..." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. In that moment, I saw my father not as the patriarch who had disapproved of my choices, but as a man who had lived with the knowledge that he might have been his wife's compromise. That night, I found the necklace box on my pillow with a note in Elaine's handwriting. "Your turn to decide what happens tomorrow." The weight of this responsibility felt heavier than the sapphire pendant itself. By morning, I would need to determine whether truth or tradition would prevail at my sister's wedding. The morning of Elaine's wedding arrived with picture-perfect weather and frenetic activity. Florists, caterers, and wedding planners swarmed the house and garden while I sat in my room, the necklace box open before me. The sapphire caught the morning light, throwing blue reflections across my walls. A knock interrupted my contemplation. Elaine entered, still in her robe, hair in rollers. Without makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the sister I'd grown up with. "Have you decided?" she asked, gesturing to the necklace. "Shouldn't that be your decision? You're the bride." She sat beside me on the bed. "I've been thinking all night, about Mom, about who I am, about what I want. And I want to wear it," she said quietly. "Not because it's tradition, or because Dad expects it, but because Mom chose to wear it, knowing its true origin. She made her choice, Claire, for better or worse." I studied my sister's face. "And are you making yours? Marrying James?" A small, genuine smile appeared. "Yes, but on my terms. We talked until dawn. I'm taking a sabbatical from the firm after the honeymoon. Going to try painting again." This surprised me. "James is supportive?" "More than supportive. He said he fell in love with me, not my career. Her eyes filled with tears. I've been so afraid of disappointing everyone that I nearly lost myself. I squeezed her hand. And what about Reverend Maxwell? The truth about the necklace? That's where I need your help. Elaine took a deep breath. I want the truth acknowledged, but not as a scandal. As a story of love, all kinds of love. Can you talk to him? And to Dad? Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of the makeup artist and hairstylist. The private moment shattered as wedding day machinery took over. While Elaine was transformed into a bride, I sought out Reverend Maxwell, finding him in the garden gazebo, reviewing his notes. Elaine wants the truth acknowledged, I said without preamble. He looked up, unsurprised. In what way? With respect. With understanding that love is complicated. With recognition that my mother made her choices and lived with them. Maxwell considered this. And your father? I'll talk to him. I found my father in his bedroom, struggling with his bow tie. For a moment, I saw him as he truly was, a man in his 60s, slightly stooped, gray-haired, holding on to control because he feared what might happen if he relinquished it. Let me, I offered, stepping forward to fix his tie. Your mother always did this, he murmured. Dad, we need to talk about the ceremony, about Reverend Maxwell and what he might say about the necklace. His face hardened. There's nothing to discuss. That necklace is a Harrington family heirloom. No, it's not, I said gently, and pretending won't change that. You want to humiliate our family? Today of all days? I finished with his tie and stepped back. I want us to stop pretending. Mom loved Catherine. She also loved you. Both can be true. You can't possibly understand. I understand that you knew the truth and married her anyway, I interrupted. That was your choice. But now Elaine deserves to make hers with all the facts acknowledged. He turned away, but not before I caught the sheen of tears in his eyes. What does she want? For Maxwell to acknowledge the necklace's true origin in the ceremony. Not as scandal, but as part of our family's complex history. After a long silence, he nodded once. Very well. As the house filled with guests and the ceremony time approached, I delivered messages between all parties. Maxwell would acknowledge the necklace's origin with dignity. My father would stand proud beside Elaine. James would support whatever narrative emerged. Ruth found me as I was helping Elaine with final preparations. The necklace now adorned my sister's neck, the sapphire resting just below her collarbone. There's something else you should know, Ruth said quietly, handing me a small package. Your mother left this for you, to be opened on Elaine's wedding day. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small sapphire charm, clearly designed to match the necklace. Catherine made 2 pieces, Ruth explained. The necklace for Elizabeth, and this bracelet for herself, a private symbol of their connection. Elizabeth wanted you to have it. Why me and not Elaine? Ruth smiled. Because you remind her of herself before choices were made, before compromises. She wanted you to remember that love should never require you to become less than who you are. As the ceremony approached, guests filled the garden. The string quartet began playing. James took his position at the altar, looking nervous but resolved. Reverend Maxwell stood ready, his expression serene despite the weight of what he would soon reveal. I fastened the sapphire bracelet around my wrist, feeling a connection to my mother and her first love that transcended time and choices. The processional music began. My father appeared with Elaine on his arm, the Harrington necklace gleaming against her white gown. Their expressions matched, determined, dignified, ready. As they reached the altar, I saw my father whisper something to Elaine that made her smile through tears. He kissed her cheek, then took his seat in the front row. Reverend Maxwell began the ceremony with traditional words about love and commitment. Then, as planned, he paused and looked directly at Elaine. The sapphire necklace you wear today has a unique history, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. It was a gift of love from Catherine Mills to Elizabeth Harrington in the summer of 1982, a symbol of their deep connection. When Elizabeth chose a different path, she carried this necklace with her, not as a rejection of that first love, but as an acknowledgement that love transforms us in ways that remain part of who we become. A murmur rippled through the guests. James reached for Elaine's hand, squeezing it in support. Elizabeth Harrington wore this necklace on her wedding day as a testament to the fullness of her heart, Maxwell continued. Today, her daughter wears it as a symbol of our family's capacity to embrace complex truths with grace and dignity. My father sat straight-backed, facing forward, but I noticed Ruth slip into the seat beside him, placing her hand over his clenched fist. Slowly, his fingers relaxed and intertwined with hers. In that crystalline moment of truth, something shifted in the Harrington family foundation. The carefully constructed narrative cracked open, allowing authentic light to shine through. And in that light, I saw my sister stand taller, my father breathe deeper, and the guests, after their initial shock, lean forward with interest rather than judgment. The garden reception was in full swing as sunset painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. To a casual observer, it appeared to be the perfect society wedding. But beneath the surface, ripples from Reverend Maxwell's revelation continued to spread. I watched from the periphery as guests clustered in small groups, voices lowered in discussion. The Whitmore family had closed ranks around James and Elaine, Margaret's protective instincts evident in her gracious deflection of two curious questions. My father maintained a dignified presence, though he spoke little and drank more champagne than usual. Senator Collins approached me as I refreshed my drink. "Quite a ceremony," he remarked. "Elizabeth was always full of surprises, even after she's gone." "You knew my mother well?" I asked. "We all have our pasts, Claire," he replied cryptically. "Boston society remembers, even when we pretend to forget." Catherine Mills was quite respected in certain circles. Her photography exhibition at the MFA in '89 was groundbreaking. This was news to me. She had a show at the Museum of Fine Arts, sponsored by your mother's foundation, though few made the connection at the time. He smiled slightly. "Your mother protected those she loved in her way." As he moved on, I spotted Reverend Maxwell standing alone near the garden wall. "Not quite what you expected when my mother asked you to officiate?" I asked, joining him. "Actually, it went better than I anticipated," he admitted. "My mother, Catherine, wanted me to refuse the request. She thought it would be too painful." "Is she still alive?" I asked, surprised. "Very much so. Living in Provincetown, still taking photographs. She's 70 now, but sharp as ever." I fingered the bracelet at my wrist. "Did she know about this? The matching piece?" "She has the third," Maxwell said. "A ring with the same sapphire setting. They bought the set together in Portugal. Catherine never wears it, but keeps it in her studio." Across the reception, I saw Elaine and James greeting guests. My sister's face showed no regret for the truth revealed, only a new confidence that transformed her usual poised beauty into something more authentic. Ruth appeared at my side, following my gaze. "She looks like Elizabeth did at that age, before the compromises." "Dad seems to be taking it better than expected," I observed. "Richard Harrington has lived with this knowledge for 35 years, Ruth said. "Perhaps there's relief in finally having it acknowledged." "Did Mom ever regret her choice?" I asked the question that had been haunting me since reading her letter. Ruth considered this carefully. "She loved your father and you girls fiercely. But yes, there were moments when the weight of the path not taken was visible, particularly after you left for Europe. She saw herself in your courage to pursue your own way." As the evening progressed, I noticed James's father, William Whitmore, in heated discussion with my father. Their body language suggested disagreement, though they maintained outwardly civil tones. When they separated, my father headed directly for the bar. I intercepted him. "Everything okay with the Whitmores?" "William has concerns about the family name," he said tightly. "Apparently, association with our unconventional history might affect James's judicial appointment prospects." "That's ridiculous," I protested. "It's 2023, not 1950. Politics remains politics." He downed his scotch. I assured him the Harringtons would maintain appropriate discretion going forward. The familiar phrase, "appropriate discretion," sparked unexpected anger in me. Haven't we had enough discretion? Enough secrets? Look what it did to Mom, to you. Your mother had a good life, he said defensively. A constrained one, I countered. And now you're ready to start the cycle again with Elaine? Something in my father seemed to deflate. I don't know how to be any other way, Claire. Later, when Elaine threw her bouquet, it sailed over the grasping hands of eager single women and landed directly in front of Reverend Maxwell. Laughter rippled through the crowd as he picked it up with good humor. As the reception wound down, I found myself alone with Elaine in the bridal suite as she prepared to leave for the airport. The necklace lay on the dressing table, its sapphire gleaming under the lights. "No regrets?" I asked as I helped her change out of her wedding gown. "About the truth?" "None." She touched the mark on her neck where the necklace had rested. "I feel like I finally understand Mom and myself. What will you do with the necklace now?" I asked. Elaine considered the jewelry. "It should go to someone who understands its true meaning." She wrapped it carefully and pressed it into my hands. Perhaps you could return it to Catherine someday, or keep it for your own story, whatever that might be. As she embraced me goodbye, I felt a shift in our relationship, from competition to connection, from comparison to understanding. The revelation that might have destroyed the wedding had instead transformed it into something authentic. Outside, sparklers illuminated the night as Elaine and James departed for their honeymoon. My father stood watching the car disappear, looking simultaneously older and somehow unburdened. Reverend Maxwell approached me as the guests began to disperse. My mother, Catherine, would like to meet you if you're ever interested. The weight of the necklace box in my purse seemed to grow heavier with possibility. I think I'd like that, I replied. 3 months after Elaine's wedding, I stood outside a weathered Cape Cod cottage in Provincetown, the December wind whipping off the Atlantic as I gathered my courage. The Harrington necklace box felt heavy in my coat pocket, a weight I'd carried across an ocean and back again. After the wedding, I'd returned to Berlin briefly to close my apartment and wrap up professional commitments. The exhibition I'd been working on suddenly felt incomplete, a story half told. I needed to understand my mother's journey before I could fully articulate my own artistic voice. Now, facing Catherine Mills's front door, I hesitated. Before I could retreat, the door swung open. A woman with silver-streaked dark curls and arresting blue eyes regarded me without surprise. "You have Elizabeth's chin," she said simply. "Come in before you freeze." Catherine's home was exactly what an artist's space should be. Walls covered with photographs spanning decades, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than appearance, books stacked on every surface. A large picture window faced the winter beach. "Michael said you might come," she remarked, leading me to a kitchen where a kettle whistled on the stove, though I admit I didn't expect it so soon. "I've been carrying this for months," I confessed, placing the necklace box on the table between us. It didn't feel right to keep it. Catherine eyed the box without touching it. "That belongs to your family now. But it was yours first. Your gift to my mother." She poured tea into mismatched mugs before responding. "Gifts freely given don't need to be returned, Claire. Even complicated ones." Later, as afternoon light faded to dusk, Catherine retrieved a small wooden box from her studio. Inside was the sapphire ring, the third piece of the set. It gleamed against faded velvet, untouched by time. "I bought these in Lisbon," she explained. "We'd been together 2 years. I was building my career as a photographer, and Elizabeth was finishing her art history degree. Before law school, before your father, before she decided that her family's expectations mattered more than her own desires." "Did you hate her for choosing him?" I asked bluntly. "For years," Catherine admitted. "Then I met someone else, had Michael, built a different life than the one I'd imagined with her. But I kept this," she touched the ring, "as a reminder that love doesn't diminish just because paths diverge." She studied me thoughtfully. "You're at a crossroads yourself, aren't you?" I found myself confiding in Catherine about my artistic frustrations, my complicated relationship with my father, and the unexpected job offer from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, a position that would bring me home permanently. "And you're afraid accepting means becoming your mother," Catherine surmised, "compromising your independence for family approval." "Yes," I admitted. "Dad's been different since the wedding, more vulnerable, less controlling. Part of me wants to build a relationship with him while there's still time." "But you fear losing yourself in the process?" she finished. "Exactly." Catherine considered this. "Perhaps the lesson from your mother's life isn't that choices are binary, authenticity or compromise. Maybe it's that we continue to choose, every day, who we become." Before I left, Catherine pressed the sapphire ring into my palm. "The set should stay together," she insisted. "Your mother would want you to have this piece of her truth." As winter deepened, I made my decision. I accepted the museum position but negotiated terms that would allow me to maintain my artistic practice. I found an apartment in Cambridge, close enough to family but with space for independence. My father and I established a fragile new relationship. During our weekly dinners, he gradually shared stories about my mother I'd never heard. Her passion for avant-garde theater, her talent for mimicry, her dream of writing art criticism. "She was so much more than I allowed her to be," he confessed one evening. "It's not too late for you, Dad," I told him, "to be more than you've allowed yourself to be." 2 weeks later, he surprised me by enrolling in a community college literature course, something he'd always been interested in but considered impractical. Elaine and James returned from their extended honeymoon transformed. My sister had indeed taken her sabbatical and set up a painting studio in their Beacon Hill townhouse. "James has been researching ethical considerations in corporate law," she told me over coffee. He's considering a shift to environmental advocacy. The Whitmores must be thrilled, I remarked dryly. They're adjusting, she smiled. Though it helps that Margaret has become Reverend Maxwell's biggest supporter at the church. I raised an eyebrow. Supporter. His LGBTQ youth program was controversial with some conservative parishioners. Margaret shut down the opposition with one fundraising gala. Elaine laughed. Turns out she had a sister who never felt accepted. James never even knew about his aunt. As spring approached, Catherine invited me to co-exhibit with her at a gallery in Provincetown. My contemporary work alongside her historical images exploring similar themes of identity and choice. The night before the exhibition opening, I fastened all 3 sapphire pieces together. The necklace around my neck, the bracelet at my wrist, the ring on my finger. In the mirror, I saw echoes of my mother, threads of Catherine, and most importantly, myself. A woman defined not by family expectations or rebellion against them, but by conscious choices about who I wanted to become. My father attended the opening with Ruth beside him. When he saw Catherine, there was a moment of palpable tension before he crossed the room and extended his hand. "Thank you for loving her," he said simply, "and for helping our daughter understand her mother's heart." Catherine's eyes widened in surprise before she accepted his handshake. "She loved you too, Richard, in her way." "I know," he replied. "It took me 30 years to understand that love isn't ownership. I'm still learning." That night, wearing all 3 sapphire pieces, I realized I had found what I'd been searching for since reading my mother's letter. Not answers about right or wrong choices, but understanding that growth comes from integrating all parts of our history. The choices made and unmade, the loves acknowledged and denied, the paths taken and abandoned. Summer arrived in Boston with unexpected intensity, the city sweltering under a heat wave as preparations for the MFA's major autumn exhibition consumed my days. As the newly appointed Special Projects Curator, I'd been given the opportunity to develop a show exploring identity and family narratives, directly inspired by my mother's story and my collaboration with Catherine. My apartment in Cambridge had become command central, walls covered with potential exhibition layouts and artist selections. The sapphire necklace, bracelet, and ring rested in a glass display case on my desk. Not just family treasures now, but potential centerpieces for the exhibition's narrative on physical objects as carriers of complex histories. Elaine, now 6 months pregnant, sprawled on my couch during one of our now regular sister strategy sessions. Her law firm sabbatical had evolved into a permanent part-time arrangement, allowing her to develop both her painting and her legal career on her own terms. "Dad called this morning," she said, fanning herself against the heat. "He wants to discuss something important with both of us. Dinner at the house tomorrow." I paused in my cataloging. "Did he say what about?" "No, but he sounded nervous." She absently stroked her belly. "And Ruth is coming too." The next evening, Elaine, James, and I arrived at the Harrington family home for dinner. The house had subtly transformed in recent months. Lighter paint colors, new artwork on the walls, fresh flowers in rooms that had previously felt preserved in amber. Ruth's influence was evident in these changes, bringing life back to spaces that had stagnated after my mother's death. My father greeted us in the garden, where a table had been set for dinner beneath the maple trees. At 65, Richard Harrington remained handsome and distinguished, though his formerly rigid posture had softened. "Before we eat," he said once we were all seated, "Ruth and I have something to share with you." Ruth reached for his hand, her expression supportive, but allowing him to lead. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Elaine's wedding," he began. "About choices, about regrets, about the stories we tell ourselves and others." He took a deep breath. "I've decided to sell the law firm." This announcement stunned us all into silence. Harrington Legal had been his life's work, the cornerstone of his identity and our family's status. "And I've established a foundation in your mother's name, the Elizabeth Harrington Foundation for Arts Education." Elaine and I exchanged glances, equally shocked. "With the proceeds from the firm?" I asked. "Partially, and with funds your mother left in a separate account, one I didn't know about until recently." He nodded to Ruth. Ruth was the executor of that particular bequest. Elizabeth apparently funded it from her inheritance, specifically earmarked for arts education for LGBTQ youth. The pieces clicked into place. That's why she wanted Reverend Maxwell to officiate, I realized. She knew he worked with LGBTQ youth programs. "Yes," Ruth confirmed. "Elizabeth began planning this foundation in her final year, but wanted certain truths acknowledged before it was announced." My father cleared his throat. "I'd like both of you to serve on the board, and," he hesitated, I've invited Catherine Mills to serve as artistic director, if she's willing. The magnitude of this transformation left me speechless. My father, who had built his life around appearances and tradition, was dismantling his professional identity and publicly honoring both my mother's values and her first love. "Does Catherine know?" I managed to ask. "I called her yesterday," he admitted. "We had a long conversation, our first real one. She's considering the offer." Later, as we sat with coffee in the living room, my father retrieved a small wooden box from his study. "I found this while going through your mother's papers," he said, placing it on the coffee table. "It was addressed to both of you, to be opened when the time was right." Inside was a collection of small watercolor paintings, scenes of two young women on beaches, in European cafes, laughing in garden settings. My mother's work, clearly depicting her time with Catherine. The paintings showed remarkable talent and a joyful intimacy that made my throat tighten. "She never told me she could paint like this," my father said quietly. Another part of herself she set aside. Beneath the paintings was a journal. The inscription read, "For my daughters, when they are ready to understand that every choice creates both loss and possibility." As we drove home that night, I contemplated the accelerating changes in our family. My father's transformation from rigid patriarch to a man confronting his past and reimagining his future. Elaine's pregnancy and her reclaimed artistic practice. My own exhibition taking shape, now potentially including Catherine in an even more significant way. The following day, I called Catherine in Provincetown to discuss my father's offer. "What are you thinking?" I asked after explaining the details. "I'm thinking Elizabeth orchestrated this from beyond the grave," Catherine replied, a hint of wonder in her voice. "She always played the long game. Will you accept?" "I'm considering it." Her tone turned thoughtful. "Would it be too complicated, Claire? Working together formally, beyond our exhibition?" The question carried layers of meaning. Our relationship had developed its own momentum, its own significance separate from my mother's memory. "I think complexity is our family specialty now," I answered, "and I'm no longer afraid of it." 2 days before Catherine's arrival in Boston, I received an unexpected email from Reverend Maxwell. He was planning to step down from his position at the church to focus exclusively on youth outreach work, and he wanted to discuss coordinating with the New Harrington Foundation. "Would it be possible to meet with you, your father, and my mother together?" he wrote. "I believe there's an opportunity to create something meaningful that honors all aspects of your mother's life and values." With this request, all the separate threads of our family narrative began converging toward a single point, a moment when past and present, choices made and unmade, would finally come into direct conversation. The exhibition, the foundation launch, Catherine's arrival, my father's retirement, Elaine's impending motherhood, all were aligning for what felt increasingly like a climactic reckoning with our family's true legacy. The night before Catherine's arrival, I stood in the museum gallery where my exhibition would soon take shape. Empty now, it awaited the visual narrative of our family's journey, the photographs, artifacts, and most importantly, the 3 sapphire pieces that had once symbolized secret love and now represented truth reclaimed. The day Catherine arrived in Boston dawned with theatrical perfection. Clear skies after a week of rain, as if the weather itself acknowledged the significance of what was unfolding. I met her at Logan Airport, watching as she emerged from the security area, carrying only a single suitcase and her camera bag. At 70, Catherine Mills possessed the composed presence of someone comfortable in her own skin. Her silver-streaked curls and artist's clothes, a striking contrast to the corporate travelers rushing past. "Welcome to Boston," I said, embracing her. "Ready for the whirlwind?" Her eyes crinkled with amusement. "I've had 40 years to prepare for this day, Claire. I think I can handle it." We drove directly to the museum, where my father had arranged to meet us with the newly discovered paintings. The MFA's back offices buzzed with preparation for the fall exhibition season, but I'd secured a private viewing room for this momentous encounter. When my father arrived, carrying a portfolio case, I witnessed a moment I'd never thought possible. Richard Harrington and Catherine Mills, the 2 great loves of my mother's life, sizing each other up not as rivals, but as reluctant collaborators in preserving her memory. "Catherine," my father said formally, extending his hand. "Thank you for considering the foundation position." "Richard," she replied, accepting the handshake. "Elizabeth would be amused by this situation, don't you think?" His expression softened unexpectedly. She always did appreciate irony. As my father spread the newly discovered watercolors across the table, Catherine's breath caught. The paintings, nearly 30 of them, chronicled not just her relationship with my mother, but the years after. Elizabeth had continued painting in secret, documenting her marriage, her pregnancies, her daughter's childhoods, creating a visual diary no one had known existed. She never stopped, Catherine whispered, touching one painting of a young woman who was clearly herself, captured in a moment of laughter. All those years I thought she'd abandoned this part of herself entirely. My father stood stiffly by the window. There was a locked cabinet in her studio that I never opened after she died. Ruth convinced me it was time. He cleared his throat. She was extraordinarily talented. Yes, Catherine agreed simply. She was. One painting stopped us all. Elizabeth had depicted herself standing between two figures, their faces slightly blurred but recognizable as my father and Catherine. Above them floated the sapphire necklace, bracelet, and ring, connected by threads of light. She painted this during her last year, my father said quietly, according to the date. This should be the centerpiece, Catherine said, meeting my eyes, with the actual sapphire pieces displayed alongside. My father nodded slowly. I agree. This unexpected consensus felt like a turning point, the moment when personal history transformed into shared legacy. As we carefully documented and repacked the paintings, plans for the exhibition and foundation began crystallizing with new clarity and purpose. By afternoon, we had moved to the main gallery space where my exhibition would be installed. The empty walls now bore small markers indicating photograph placements, artifact displays, and text panels. In the center, a custom display case awaited the 3 sapphire pieces. Ruth joined us, bringing Elaine and Reverend Maxwell. The key players in our family drama gathered in this empty space, surrounded by the ghostly outlines of an exhibition that would soon make public what had once been fiercely private. Before we proceed further, my father said with unexpected formality, I want to make something clear. He looked directly at Catherine. I've spent decades resenting you as the phantom in my marriage. But these paintings, he gestured to the portfolio, have shown me that Elizabeth's capacity to love was not diminished by her history with you. It was expanded. Catherine considered him thoughtfully. I spent just as many years resenting you for the life I thought you took from us. She smiled slightly. It seems we've both been haunted by incomplete narratives. Maxwell stepped forward. That's why this exhibition and foundation matter beyond your family. They demonstrate how restricted narratives limit understanding, and how truth, even difficult truth, creates possibility. As if on cue, the museum director appeared with the exhibition contract for my signature. The formal document would commit the institution to presenting our family's story in all its complexity. My mother's secret art, her relationship with Catherine, the symbolism of the sapphire jewelry, and the foundation born from these revelations. Once you sign, the director reminded me, we're committed to the October opening. All of this, she gestured to our assembled group, becomes public. I looked at each person in turn. My father, standing straighter than he had in years. Elaine, one hand protectively over her pregnant belly. Ruth, whose loyalty to my mother had extended beyond death. Maxwell, whose presence had catalyzed our family's transformation. And Catherine, whose love had persisted through decades of separation. Before I sign, I said, I need to be certain we're all prepared for what comes next. This isn't just an exhibition or a foundation launch. It's the public acknowledgement of truths we've only recently confronted ourselves. My father spoke first. I've spent my life concerned with appearance over authenticity. I won't make that mistake any longer. The baby deserves to be born into truth, Elaine added, not carefully maintained fiction. Catherine met my gaze. Elizabeth wanted this. Not for vindication, but for liberation. Yours, Elaine's, even Richard's. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders as I signed the contract, committing us irreversibly to this path. As I set down the pen, the museum lights flickered briefly, a power surge from summer electrical demands, but it felt momentarily like my mother's presence acknowledging our choice. It's done, I said simply. The night before the exhibition opening, our extended family gathered at the Harrington home for dinner. The table in the garden had been expanded to accommodate everyone. My father and Ruth, Elaine and James, Catherine and Reverend Maxwell, and several of my mother's oldest friends. As twilight descended and lanterns illuminated faces new and familiar, my father rose to offer a toast. Around his neck hung a slender gold chain with a small sapphire pendant, a companion piece Catherine had discovered among her mother's possessions, apparently purchased but never given. To Elizabeth, he said, raising his glass, who taught us eventually that truth is the greatest legacy. To Elizabeth, echoed around the table. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, I slipped away briefly to the quiet of my father's study. From my bag, I removed the final element of tomorrow's exhibition, my mother's letter to me, which I had decided to include in the display. Rereading her words one last time, I was struck by her concluding lines. The necklace your sister will wear on her wedding day carries not just my history, but my hope. That you both will live with fewer compromises than I chose to make. That you will wear your truths openly, whatever they may be. Tomorrow, her hope would be fully realized as we opened the exhibition to the public. The sapphire necklace that had once represented secrecy and sacrifice would transform into a symbol of authenticity and reconciliation, not just for our family, but for anyone who visited the gallery and recognized their own struggles with identity and choice in our story. The Elizabeth Harrington exhibition opened on a perfect autumn day, sunlight streaming through the museum's grand windows as visitors began arriving. Press, museum patrons, and art critics mingled with our extended family and friends, all drawn by the pre-opening publicity that had positioned the exhibit as both artistic achievement and cultural statement. Standing near the entrance, I watched people's reactions as they moved through the gallery spaces. Many paused longest at the central sapphire display, where the three pieces, necklace, bracelet, and ring, rested alongside my mother's painting of herself between my father and Catherine. "You've created something remarkable," the museum director murmured, appearing beside me. The Boston Globe is calling it a masterclass in narrative curation. Across the room, my father stood with Ruth beside one of my mother's later paintings, a scene depicting Elaine and me as teenagers, seated in the garden. He looked different somehow, the rigid posture of the successful attorney replaced by the more contemplative bearing of a man reconnecting with suppressed aspects of himself. Elaine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her pregnancy now prominently visible. When she reached the display containing our mother's letter, she paused to read it again, one hand resting on her belly as if already sharing this family history with her unborn child. "Claire Harrington?" A young woman approached me, notebook in hand. "I'm with Boston University's LGBTQ student magazine. Would you comment on how this exhibition might impact young people struggling with family expectations versus authentic identity?" "I think what our mother's story shows," I answered carefully, "is that choices don't have to be evaluated solely as right or wrong. Each path creates both losses and possibilities. The tragedy isn't in choosing one path over another, but in being unable to acknowledge the fullness of one's identity within that choice." By afternoon, the exhibition had transformed from revelation to conversation, exactly what my mother would have wanted. When the crowds thinned briefly, I found Catherine and my father standing together near the foundation display, which outlined the arts education programs that would begin the following month. "We've received 3 major funding commitments already," my father was saying. "Plus, Margaret Whitmore has offered the family's summer property for residential workshops. Elizabeth would be pleased by your partnership," Ruth commented, joining them. My father adjusted his glasses. "It's strange. I spent years resenting a shadow without realizing that acknowledging it would ultimately free us all." "Not just us," Catherine replied, gesturing toward a group of teenagers intently studying the exhibition. "Them too." As closing time approached, Reverend Maxwell gathered our family in the center of the gallery for a private moment. The museum staff had discreetly cleared the remaining visitors, leaving us alone among the artifacts of our shared history. "Elizabeth once told me," Maxwell said softly, "that she hoped someday her daughters would understand that love is never wasted, even when paths diverge. I believe today fulfills that hope." He removed a small envelope from his pocket. "She asked me to give you this once everything was in the open. It's addressed to all of you, Richard, Catherine, Claire, and Elaine." My father opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my mother's distinctive handwriting. "If you're reading this, then truth has finally prevailed over appearance. The necklace has completed its journey from secret to legacy. Remember that every choice creates both shadow and light. My greatest wish is that you will now live in that light, without fear of the shadows. All my love across time, Elizabeth." As my father read these words aloud, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, but a threshold crossed. The exhibition would continue for months, the foundation's work for years, but this moment marked the true culmination of what had begun when my sister wore the heirloom necklace at her wedding. 1 year later, I stand in the garden of Catherine's Rockport cottage, watching my infant niece reach for the sapphire pendant that catches sunlight as Elaine leans over her. Elizabeth Catherine Whitmore, named for her grandmother's, has her mother's determined expression and, according to my father, my mother's curious eyes. The foundation has funded its first group of art scholarships, with Maxwell leading mentorship programs that have already gained national recognition. My father, now fully retired, has published a well-received article on ethical considerations in family law, drawing partly from his own experience. The exhibition catalog, published in multiple languages, sits on coffee tables and in university libraries across the country. Occasionally, I receive messages from strangers who found courage in our family's story to initiate difficult conversations in their own lives. As autumn approaches again, we gather our extended family to celebrate little Elizabeth's first birthday. The sapphire pieces, necklace, bracelet, and ring, rest together in their display case in my Cambridge apartment. But today they'll be worn again, not as secrets or burdens, but as symbols of a legacy reclaimed. Truth, once revealed, continues to illuminate paths forward that none of us could have imagined when my sister wore the heirloom necklace at her wedding. Family heirlooms carry stories, some acknowledged, others hidden beneath polished surfaces. What truths might your family treasures reveal if given voice? Consider the objects passed through your own generations. Do they represent authentic histories or carefully curated narratives? Perhaps there's a conversation waiting to happen, a letter needing to be written, or a truth-seeking acknowledgement. Your truth, like Elizabeth Harrington's, might be waiting for its moment to create something new from what has always been.